welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. This show is part two of a discussion that I started in part one, dealing with three questions that I was trying to answer. Before I continue, I'll let those of you who are new to this show called the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. And the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fictions. Yes, we know that the media and many people get things get things wrong. But I believe also that a lot of people, for political reason or some other personal reason, tend to get things wrong deliberately when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. We have a dynamic history. Our history did not start in 1619. I have nothing wrong with anything like the 1619 Project or things like that. That's the beginning of our sojourn through America for the last 400 years, but we are ancient people. And a great scholar that who's now with the ancestors, Dr. Henry Clark, would always say, if we start our history in 1619, we're saying, instead of saying that this is an interruption of our history, we're saying that everything that comes after it is something great that we've benefited from. No, we lost a lot in 1619. Okay, as a people, because those people that came over there there's no such people as slaves. I don't even use the word slaves. We are enslaved. It was a condition that we're in. There's no group of people, ethnic group called prisoners. Okay, when you're in prison, it's a condition. It doesn't stop your family history or your history as whether you come from Norway or Sweden or England, you'll still have a history. Prisoners doesn't stop you from doing that. And it's things like that I'm going to interwove into the discussion that we're bringing in. The big topic is racism. I started off last week with three questions, and I'm going to continue into the second show. Okay, what is the actual definition of racism? How was racism established in America? That's where I left off. And can African Americans be racist in America? That's an interesting question that I hear all the time misquoted and coming from nonsense. Race in America, we first got to establish that race in America has shaped everything about Americans' concept of culture, the form of government we have, democracy, the economic system, the political system, the military system. So when people say, why you got to bring up that race card when we have a discussion of something that has to do with the death of a black man, or the beating up of Rodney King in the 90s, or the death of George Floyd and all the black people that have been murdered by police, or things that are happening to us in all forms in American society, and black people who know their history in relationship to America try to express something, and it comes across to the ears of white Americans about race. Well, let me be, again, having a strong opinion does not mean that you have true and actual documented knowledge. Most white Americans, I think I can say that, whether they got their information in high school or college, or they love history, most of that stuff is mythology. It's not based on truth. It's based on a myth that had to be told to justify how America came into being. If you include American history what we call black history, which is American history, it'll come across in a whole different way. Let me give you an example of how things are taught to white America and some black America if we go to the white schools and get their point of view. We all know the great Jackie Robinson, right? I could say most people would understand that Jackie Robinson is the first person who was, hired by the Dodgers in 1948, I think, and he integrated baseball. Okay, that's the way it is shaped in our school systems, or what white people hear or want to hear, what black people hear when we go to white schools. But the truth is, from a black perspective, the narrative should come as this. Jackie Robinson was allowed by white America to play baseball. Comes across totally different. Because if white America did not allow Jackie Robinson to get on that field, if he decided he was going to, that had the freedom of his body to do what he wants to do, and he walked on in Dodger Stadium without the permission of white America, what do you think would have happened to Jackie Robinson the minute he stepped on that field? So it's not about some kind of great and glorious awakening. It's always that dominant group who decides what's going to be done to the black bodies that happen to occupy the same land that they have. Well, folks, that's the definition of racism. Racism is not an individual event like the Jackie Robinson. It is a system. The baseball system, the police criminal justice system, the military system. And out of those things, there's a certain way of thinking based on laws that were established from the founding of this country. Racism is systematic. See, I have a definition of prejudice. Here we go. Prejudice is defined as a preconceived opinion that is not based on any logical reason or actual life experience. Okay? Jackie Robinson's life experience in 1948 when he walked on to Dodger Field, that's the story we're given, or how that story is shaped. His reality is not that. In fact, he wrote a book in 1960s in which he said that ever since then, he did not stand for the national anthem because he understood he know how he was lauded and praised in white America's mythology-driven story of what happened with the Dodgers and Jackie Robinson, but that was not his reality. During the 1968 Olympics, when John Carlos and Smith did their famous on the podium raising the fist, and a lot of the black athletes in 1968 were upset by what they did to John Carlos and Smith. Even though records were broken and they actually literally won the race, they just protested what was going on in America in 1968. Somebody sent Jesse Owens to the locker room, figuring that, hey, he's a black man, and he followed the rules, whatever he did in the Olympics in Germany in 1936. But those young black youth of 1968 didn't want to hear a word he had to say, because they saw how he was treated when he came back, there was a dinner honoring Jesse Owens in New York when he came back from Germany. But guess what? Jesse Owens couldn't go through the front door. This is the honoree. This is the Waldorf Astoria. This is in liberal New York City. He had to go through the back, him and his wife, all dressed up in a tuxedo, but he had to go through the same service entrance. That's a system of racism. And he's going to tell, 30-something years later, he's going to tell black youth who are tired of being treated that way, being told in school. Many of them were college students. Jesse Owens went to Ohio State, right? College student. He couldn't sleep on campus. Yet this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. There is two realities that are being discussed. The experience that we have and the reality that we experience. And that reality is always left out of the history books. And the mythology that is still being spewed to this very day when you talk to a white American. I'm not saying it's about being bad, but you have to understand that just because you might have, say, a black niece or nephew, don't mean that you understand what it means to be black in America. We cannot change America while most white Americans stay in their comfort zone. Let me repeat that. You cannot change racism as long as white Americans are comfortable within the systems of racism. You got to go out of your comfort zone. That means you have to have these tough questions and answers and discussions and understanding of why we are like that. I started off talking about 1619, And I said, I left off making this profound statement that there was no such thing as whiteness in that at that time. Most people were just considered English, French, Spanish, or whatever ethnic group they came from Europe, and established their little colonies here in what we could now call the Americas. And then there was another group that was already here that was ignored, Native people, okay? And then you got another group that were kidnapped and brought over here. Yet the mythology that's being passed on to us is that somehow we were landing in the land of the free. But then we had law that says, well, we weren't. How could that be? How can you have laws that were established? For example, there was a law that came about in 1638. Okay, 1638, there was a law that was established in the colony of Maryland. And it was called the Doctrine of Inclusion or Exclusion Law, a literal law. And that doctrine of exclusion in the colony of Maryland, which was copied by other other colonies, said that the black people in that colony could not benefit from the fruits of anything that the white people in that colony brought forth. We could not benefit anything. See, you see a foundation. That's kind of like the foundation stone of racism to me. one of the early mentions based on the color of a skin that determined how a society, okay, socially constructed a system of how you interact. So no matter what we do in the Maryland colonies, we cannot reap the fruits found in that colony. We are left out. Sound kind of racist system to me. Like I said, race in America has everything to do with how we shape our concept of history, culture. I think that law in 1638, and I don't want you to even believe a word I'm saying, look it up yourself. Knowing requires thinking, thinking requires study. How many of you have even heard that all the years? You see, white America, you can go from kindergarten all through to grad school and don't have to deal with the topic of race. Whereas a black kid, before they even enter nursery, kindergarten, know that he's different or she's different from what she see on TV or how she interact with her white friends or his white friends or lack of white friends or neighborhoods where there's no white people. So there's still certain concepts, unspoken concepts, but concepts nonetheless that deals with race in America. I hope I answered the first question. I could go further. What is racism? It is not an incident. It is a system in which one group, the power dynamic between two groups of people at least, where one group has the 90% of the power in that society. Political power, economic power, military power, okay? That does sound like some of the laws that were started to be established in colonial times, and how we as black people would be in that society. The 1638 Exclusion Act, the slave codes that tell us how we should be in a group, what group should have, at least if there's more than 6 black people together, there should be one white person overseeing them. When you have laws like that established, you establish certain type of practices, certain types of behavioral practices. Let me read something I heard a great scholar says. That the actions of a community, 1638, Maryland Doctrine of Exclusion Law, black codes, etc., become the experience of that generation. All the black people, all the white people in that colony who've grown up year after year, year after year. And the experience of that generation becomes the history of the next generation. Well, that's what I saw my father doing. That's what my grandfather was doing. Those type of actions. We're not supposed to allow any black person to reap the benefits of the fruits of our labor as white people by law, while the history of several generations becomes the traditions of a people. So when you have racist type of laws being established in colonial time, which produce a particular type of ideas in that colony, and generation after generation after generations are doing those behaviors, then they become part of the culture. So when you wondering in 2021 why we have Karens and what we call Kens, white people that are on these video clips all over the internet coming up to white people asking, what are you doing here? Why are you here? You know, out of the blue, and we're 10 or 12 generations into supposedly freedom. We have the right to be wherever we want to, but they don't see it that way because there's a tradition in which you create that type of atmosphere. It would then come out of the blue, black codes, 6065, okay? Slavery was entrenched. There was no longer indentured servitude for black people, but a permanent working force based on the status of the mother. So if you're born from an enslaved mother, then you belong to the owner of that mother. And you know where that law came from? That came out of England. There was a case in the 1600s, or maybe the 1500s, in which a farmer had a dispute with his neighbor. He had a sow, or that's a female pig, who had piglets, and they somehow roamed onto the neighbor's farm, who claimed them as his own. And out of that court case, of course it was brought to case, it was established based on the fact that the first farmer owned that sow, the female, all the piglets still belongs to him no matter where the offspring goes. It's under his by law, and it was out of that crazy law that it was established here in the Americas and throughout the diaspora that enslaved children, black children, belong to the slaveholder who owned the mother. That's the precedent that they use. And you wonder why racism is you're trying to, people go into mental gymnastics to avoid hearing the truth of those realities today when they jump on the fact of critical race theory. We don't want to hear history from the point of view of Black America. Why? Because it goes against the mythology of this place being the land of the free and the home of the brave. But we must speak this truth in order you got to be in that uncomfortable zone in order to change the reality of America. Otherwise, we'll continue to hear these gymnastics and the cognitive dissonance, which is an actual psychological condition, will constantly kick in. And like I said, there was no such thing as white people in 1619. That was one of the crazy psychological offshoots to make sure that those laws were established. You got to have delineation, boundaries. That's racism. That's a system. Why are black men and women always throughout the history of America seem to be on the wrong side of the law? Well, there is a racist history. If you are, after 1865, considered an enslaved person, permanent working force in America, and you leave the plantation for your right to be free, you are violating laws. Or you have the audacity to leave the plantation without permission, then we're going to have people with stars on their chest, which were the symbol of slave patrols. We will send after you. You are a criminal. And why are you a criminal? Because you wanted to be free, to be true to who you are. free to deal with your body as you see fit. That's how racism is established. And like I said in that statement, you do that generation after generation after generation, it becomes part of the culture. 5 or 10 generations later, do you think about why you do these things in a society? That's what you've always seen your mother did. That's what your father did. That's what your grandpappy did. That's why you went to a war in 1865 to fight a civil war for some states' rights. And what were the states' rights? To own people that look like me. So this contradicts everything, that mythology. That's what I said in the first show. Most white Americans are not taught true history. Hard to deal with, but it is the truth. The present moment is always grown out of the past. And if the past is skewed or wrong, so will be the ideas you're working on in the present. And when you see, it's not the behavior that you should look at first. Why is he behaving like that? Why is that person waving that Confederate battle flag through the halls of Congress? It's not the behavior, it is the ideas that that person is working on. And where do those ideas come from? It comes from a false historical information. Knowing requires thinking. Thinking requires study. And if you're not studying, and if you're not going through the effort to really learn, and white America, just having black friends, just having black relatives, no, that's not enough work to do that. Because you cannot come out of a system from the time you were a child, indoctrinated by law to certain behavioral patterns, social engineering it's called, and think that just because you got a black friend now, that conditioned response has changed. You might make the effort, and commendable to you, but you got to work to do it. That's my point. And we're not working at it as we speak. America still has a lot of work to do when it comes to race. You know, you see, embedded in the word racism is race, is the word race. It's a group dynamic. If you're part of that group, if you're white in America, the system that you think is normal was by law created and socially engineered to benefit you. There are 2 tiers. If you're poor and white, you're still on the upper tier, maybe at the lower end. If you're black, native people, or Latino, you're in the second tier. There was a commission done in 1967 that said it. There's 2 Americas, one black, one white, both separate but unequal. Till next time.